The title of this panel or debate is Exhibition, exhibiting art and film within the medium and also as a presentation form. This is going to be somehow the subject. I'm going to start with a question for Louis Klahr, whose movie we just saw. Because it's quite an overwhelming film. I'm quite overwhelmed, I have to admit. And so maybe we just start with a very simple question to get to be introduced somehow to your universe besides the images, which is often as a starting point the title.
Oh, okay.
Which is 66. So maybe you can talk a bit. What that means. I mean, we all know 66 is the root and obviously a year that you depict somehow. Now I answered your question,
you
but you
your
can.
Own question. But I can say more. Okay. Right. So there is a personal dimension. There's a lot of veiled autobiography inside the work, which it's not important whether or not you understand it. It's kind of there in other kinds of ways that it's emotionally accessible. So in 1966, I was 10 years old. In 1966. And it was a year I was very happy, but I also had different challenges. So there's a personal dimension to this, and also there's important things about 1966 as a year in America, culturally. I tend to be very excited about time periods where there's a kind of transition going on. Actually, a lot of artworks too, where there's kind of there's part of something that's visible and part of what's coming next is starting to come in, and there's a kind of awkward mixture to some degree, or it's not completely integrated yet. And things are in juxtaposition. Maybe this is why I like collage so much, because collage is so much about juxtaposing things together that don't necessarily go together, and then they become different through that juxtaposition. So.
And why is that year? Why was that year 66 such a?
Well, it's kind of in American culture. It's a kind of transition point between, especially in terms of popular culture, between a kind of sense of old and new that starts to happen. So the new is happening, especially in music, but it becomes something much more extreme by 1967, and like psychedelia hits, and the counterculture hits American culture in a very different way than it was before then. So there's a sense of two Americas coexisting at that point, the old and the new, and kind of rubbing up against each other.
However, the material we see in your film, the kind of found material, I would call it, photos, magazines, movie scenes, footage, I would, consider to be really 60s.
Yes. Yeah.
So for you, it's. So we were wondering also how you compile this material. Do you classify it at all, or even categorize it? Like, how do you approach all this stuff we just saw?
Very, very intuitively. So part of what you're feeling overwhelmed by is what I experienced making the work, is that I've collected things since I decided to become a collage artist. And this is back in the 1970s. And I collected my first object then. My parents were going to give away a set of encyclopedias for children that I grew up with. And I said, no, I need that. And my father especially said, you're depriving some kid of, this encyclopedias. And I said, no, I need that. And they were clueless as to why I could possibly need this. But it was like the first thing I collected, and since then I've been collecting things. And now I have a garage in Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, people's secret lives take place in their garages, actually. And it's just totally full of things. And so I'm kind of struggling in there to find things. I don't have a system of order.
Oh, really? So you
Yes.
have your archive in your garage,
Yes.
not on your desktop?
No, totally. This is all material that I'm shooting just the way I shot in 16 and Super 8. There's a camera, and these things are cut out, and I'm performing them underneath the camera of how they move. So, so I have this large archive of things of imagery that I've created, that I've saved over collected over a very long period of time. So it's several decades now, and I have to find my way through that. I'm always losing things which
So it's
changes
not like
the way the films go, and yeah.
So it's not like a library with stickers, magazines.
I try to be a good German and organize, and immediately I'm defeated. I'm a crazy American, and it's kind of better for me to be lost, because things happen. Like, for instance, there's an image that's very one of the central images in the series, where there's the character twice, this male character, and one of them is saying I, and they are back to back. So that's not an image that I thought to make. That was an image that actually one of my students found on one of my trays. It had gone together accidentally, those two figures together. And he said, "Look what happened," because he knew it was a good image. And I said, "Yeah, you're right, Manuel, that's a great image." And so I needed to make as part of the series. So there's a sense of happy accidents and discovery, and so your sense of being overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed. I'm working in a reverie. I'm discovering things as I go along. I'm lost in my work.
In a way, you're taking these things that you're lost in a way. You're arranging and exhibiting them to speak of the topic of the night. You are moving these static images into a movie. Is this and we see some signs of storytelling. It is not always 100%, like it's not always 100% evidence. So the question is, do you see yourself as a storyteller, and in which way do you feel connected with that to the medium of cinema and the way we're presenting these films here?
Great question. I do see myself as a storyteller, but I don't see stories as limited to just kind of plot. And so there's a lot of other things that occur, and there's a lot of other things that I want to describe besides just the stories. So Lethe, the last film, is the most explicitly narrative. I think that one you can actually follow, but the rest of them kind of play off narrative language, and then you need to find yourself and inside them as the audience. And I'm leaving it open in that kind of way so that you can tell yourself stories. So there isn't necessarily, there's my intentions, there's my definitive version for myself, but that isn't necessarily what you're going to experience. And it isn't important to me that you experience that.
The debate about like high and popular culture, which is something which I think is in a way a typically European thing, but maybe we'll come to the difference of that afterwards. Michael, you also have worked with like found material a lot yourself. Done collaging as a graphic designer. On the other hand, you are also like you were the art director and art editor for Granta, which also always tries to bridge a bit these genres and these divisions. How would you define your approach in working like with the transfer of media and the bridging of these different genres, so to speak?
Well, actually, it's certainly from a process point of view, it's probably not that far away from the way Lewis's actually works. Because I have to say, I absolutely love it. Thank you so much. But it's almost as though, because I mean, I was looking at your film almost as like you're talking about LA being, this almost being the underbelly of LA, and I almost saw it as being almost like a psychogeographic map of LA, and you're looking at it from that point of view. And I think for me, there's a really sort of strong semiotic underpinning to anything that I make, and it's always about taking coded information or taking coded images and then recoding them, reimagining them. And I'd always likened it, I think I was giving a talk a while back, and I was saying it's principally taking elements of history and then you're drawing outlines, you're creating your own shapes from them. So it's just a kind of, it's a continuous appropriation. And I think it's also something that's become part of our, as a cultural shift, it's part of our language anyway. We all do it. If you look at the way we use, we've understood imagery in a quite a sophisticated manner now, even if we haven't articulated it that way, just from the basis of how we use memes and so on. So how you would take one meaning and put it with another in order to then present your own idiosyncratic representation through, or memory, or dream, or experience through that image. And that's principally what I've always done, and have expanded that across different disciplines from text all the way through to film.
Yeah. Let me just jump in on that for a second with a very quick statement. That part of the way you can understand what I'm doing is exactly what Michael's talking about, which is that in Western culture, we're bombarded by imagery of all sorts, whether we want to be or not, and we're constantly absorbing things. So part of the way you can understand what I'm doing is it's a response to that and a need to personalize that the way we all do. I'm sure we've all had experiences of the way that we've turned song lyrics for our own purposes, for our own psychological needs, or misunderstood them in ways that are more relevant to your own consciousness. And so that's part of what I'm doing here and what you just watched, but only part of it. Okay.
In how far does you were talking about this, reappropriation, but in how far does how does this relate to the context of origin? I mean, they're always being taken out of some context, and they always have a meaning that precedes the use that is being made of them in a collage, for example. So is there any and how do you react to that? How do you deal with that?
In terms of authorship? In terms of the generation of images?
And the way you process these things,
Right, so immediately when you have an image that's been created, in what capacity, whether you have knowledge of it or not, you've added your own kind of stamp to your understanding of that image. And it's exactly how we do things like tagging now, for example. So, I see this picture of a glass, and I might tag that glass. You might tag that as the glass my girlfriend drank from, and someone else might do something else. So therefore, you've already immediately changed the position and the purpose of that image. And that's principally how I've always kind of treated imagery. And then the associative aspect comes in when you drop in something else and you add another layer in. And I think the origins are always there. They're always kind of something that, but they sort of, you add layers to images very, very quickly.
And one big question, of course, of how images are perceived is not only the way they are arranged, but they are exhibited and presented. So, Alexander, at the Film Museum, you don't only show experimental films. In a museum as an art institution, you don't only show experimental films, such as Louis Klahr's work. You're showing films in an art context that were originally designated for commercial ends primarily. How do you deal with the situation of combining these different types of images in this museum?
Or is there no difference?
Or is there no difference?
First of all, I deal with it by not calling the space or the institution that I work in an art institution, even though it is, but it is not only that, which has to do with the fact that film is not only that, but many more things. So I believe that a museum dedicated to this medium or this form of expression needs to be able in several ways to be art and more than art and less than art or different than art and art expectations generally are. And the great, I think film itself, which this work we saw today and strangely the two other films I saw completely today did this in their own ways. Film made this very conscious in their own ways. Film is itself a mode of exhibition. Film is itself, just as it is a successor of the novelistic, you could say. Not that the novelistic in the form of the novel would have to stop as soon as cinema came in, but in some way, I think in obvious ways, cinema was that, but it was also a successor of the forms of exhibition that the 19th century had developed. Each film in its various ways is an exhibition, even though might not be the most obvious way we think about films. And it exhibits various stuff, and it is often seemingly not very conscious that it is an exhibiting machine. Sometimes it behaves, or most of the times, in the lowest common denominator cases, as Candice called them. It seems to not be aware of itself being an exhibiting machine, but in several ways it is. I think this variety, or the wide reach that the medium has necessitates institutions that do not focus on one or the other. The problem is that, as we spoke before, that cinema is always seen as the dispositif for something commercial, for something mainstream. When we talk about going to the movies, going to the cinema, we think of it as the place where the lowest common denominator kind of moving images happen. I think history proves this notion wrong. I think history has an incredible amount of things that have been done and can be done with that medium. So it necessitates, I think, us to think differently about the form of exhibiting film in a cinema, or the cinema as such. For me, it's a long-winded way of saying that for me it's the most normal thing. What you asked me, it's the most normal thing to screen, to exhibit on a screen Louis Klahr's films, Jean Rouche's films, and James Cameron's films, to pick three, or at least two of the three are pretty random examples. In one and the same week, on one and the same day, in one and the same program, and to educate, because to a certain degree a museum has the function of a transmitting or educating institution as well, to educate whoever becomes a viewer of this, or becomes a participant in such exhibition acts, that this is film, and that that there are ways and places where one can get rid of the various narrowed down or boiled down simple versions of the idea of film and cinema.
I don't think I understand the way you use the term. You mean you exhibit, a film is exhibiting something from the world, or the film is exhibited when you show it in a movie theater?
In our case at the Film Museum, we exhibit films. But I do think that each film in itself is a form of exhibiting things. Like an exhibition is a cultural format, an art exhibition. Any type of museum exhibition is a dispositif in which elements are put in relation to each other. And I think films do very similar things. Films, by arranging elements, rephotographed, or however you'd call them, but by arranging visual elements in certain ways and by establishing connections between them, work very much like exhibitions do. So that was my first.
Would you agree, Candice?
If you want to pitch in, please go ahead.
I was just going to say that it's also the difference is also partly about the relationship between the audience or the viewer and the art. And I think that film has a kind of different responsibility, like a self-generated responsibility, because it's created as a really strong vernacular that everybody is accustomed to. And whereas when you're exhibiting film in an art context, it's trying to do the opposite. It's actually trying to fight with that relationship. And I think that that's really quite key. I don't think you can look at it in any other way. Like cinema is that, in that it has a relationship with the audience, whether who's passive or not. But that's sort of rather key. That's what separates it, I think, is that language.
It's shown in film festivals, it's shown in art galleries, it's shown in screening places that are dedicated to small cinema. It's shown places like this. And it's comfortable, and it's shown online. People watch it online. It's on DVD, so it's in a domestic setting, which maybe is the one I prefer most, because that's always been the art that's most important to me, is the art that I experience domestically, including feature films. So to me, it's not a question of deciding among all these things. It's a question of existing with them, because they all exist in different ways. So I don't feel like I have to make a decision about that, about where it, different qualities come out when you look at my film the size that we looked at it tonight, and that's very satisfying. And I love for people to see it that way, but it's not the only way. I don't have a pure idea of like, that's the only way you can look at it, which certainly the experimental filmmakers that I revered and got to know and studied their work, a lot of them did feel that way, that it was a setting like this only that made sense for their films. And but I think it's more exciting that it can go a lot of different kinds of directions.
So may I ask you something?
Yes.
To jump in? You described to us at the beginning of the screening, you highlighted the fact that you'd rather not have us see this as an anthology of shorts and pick our favorites or not, but that we should rather fight that impulse and see it, which I can fully understand why you said that, see it as a whole consisting of chapters, like chapters of a novel or chapters of a feature film. Now, you said that you equally enjoy the thought of people watching the work online or at home on a DVD or in a gallery or in a museum. To me, I wonder if, to which extent, when you say that, to which extent you include your knowledge of the various dispositives, of the various framings that your work undergoes when it's part of a museum show. The museum show, also the gallery visit, to a lesser degree, of course, the way we structure time at home, but we also do have some inclination, I think, of how we structure time online on the internet. To which degree do you expect those structurings or dispositives to run against what you said at the beginning of the screening? That what is your preferred way of perception of this work, or are there ways in which it does go against what you told us, and it's equally joyful for you to think of the ways in which a gallery visit or a museum visit, which in many, many cases will not be a 90-minute very present, focused ingestion of the work. What does that do to the work, and in which ways does it make you happy or angry or in between?
It's just more experience. So because I'm here with you and because we're in this setting, I could request this of you, of how to look at my film tonight. And the reason I do that is just that it can lead you to some discoveries possibly that some people miss, because that are there, For instance, and this gets back to other things we've been talking about transformation and the value of collage as a transformative, and the value of working with media images in a transformative way, is one of the main things that happens if you watch it this way, in sequence, the sequence that you did tonight, is that when you get to the still life film, Ambrosia, now this was not something that I was aware of. I was aware of it more on a kind of visceral, textural level, and a sense of quiet that the other films have around it. And then that film is the only one that's silent. Because of the context of the kind of crime images that I've ripped from that I'm not usually activating, actually. I'm using the crime comic book characters as kind of ordinary people and talking about everyday life, actually. When you get to the still life, what people are telling me is that they're seeing a whole kind of sense. It feels like kind of photographs that people take at a crime scene to them. So the whole context has created this other meaning that if you watch that film on its own, and when I finished it, I sent it to many people who I trust for feedback during my working process, and very few of them had any kind of interesting response, let alone that one. But in the context of the way this sequence, there's a whole other meaning that happens for many people. And so that's partly what I'm after, is that there's a possibility that could occur.
But that's
But it's fine that it doesn't also. It's not going to be the same. This is one of the values of experimental film for me and artist film, is that there's a whole range of subjectivities that are individual, that are interacting with what you're doing, and they're going to go off in the direction. I'm making a lot of space for you to go off into your own subjectivity. That's important to me. So, yeah, I have my intentions. Am I completely married to them? You could come up to me and you could tell me something you're getting, and I won't want to talk to you because I'm not interested in your take. Yeah, that would happen, okay? That could happen too, all right? But in general, I'm glad, I'm glad you had that experience too, even if you misunderstood it as far as I'm concerned, right? So that's part of what I'm excited about, because I'm collaborating as a collage artist with all these people that made all these images and often sounds and music. I didn't make them, right? I'm remaking them. And a lot of these are dead. They're dead images. They're outmoded in terms of capitalism. They've been cast aside to some degree. And I'm reanimating them. I'm bringing life back into them in some kind of way, and that's what I see as part of my task too.
I was actually just going to, expand upon that, because I thought that what was happening is in a really interesting way, or what you're doing to us as an audience is really making us to try and recontextualize time within the context of a linear narrative because of the range of textures and materials and moments and periods, and how much time you might spend with one frame, and then how we might receive that, and then where our associative thoughts are coming from. There's a lot of quite staccato movement like that, and I think that's I thought that was a really powerful thing in terms of us sitting here in the cinema and thinking, okay, we've got 90 minutes to go through this, but the reality is that we're looking at time in a much more three-dimensional form through that piece.
And there's a lot of different types of time that are available here, and there's a lot of different types of cinematic time. That something really short can explode into a sense of the infinite if it hits you if it speaks to you, if it speaks to a really deep part of you. That's part of what's accessible through poetic juxtaposition and montage in the way that Michael and I are talking about it. If it's not speaking to you, this can seem like it's about 5 or 6 hours long, I'm sure. And there's a number of people who left, and that was appropriate. It's what I'm looking for in terms of audience ultimately is I'm not actually looking for an audience like this. I very rarely expect to have actually what occurred here tonight, which is that there's a large amount of people and they were engaged, and I could feel that. That's very exciting when that happens. But I don't count on that. What I look for is individuals who the work speaks to. So I'm really I'm creating the exact opposite of what Hollywood film does in that regard. Because Hollywood film is looking for a large audience because they have to make back the money that they've spent on their film. So that's part of what is driving the economics of lowest common denominator. They've got to fill those seats, right? And it's a very expensive form to work in. This is not expensive for me to do. I made this for about $5,000. This 90 minutes.
But over 13 years.
It's really over the last 3.5. Okay. Yeah. I don't think that this context is at all outmoded in any sense. I think it's just one of many choices of how to work and it requires certain things that sometimes people underestimate. And but it's a wonderful context. The focus that it has and the shared sense of experience is unlike anything else. And those are things that I treasure in my life.
I just found it fascinating how from your question about Raymond Bellour's position to how we all perceive the various ways of watching or receiving moving images. In Candice's answer to that, we ended with production models and the question of working with actors or a crew or a big crew or a small crew or no crew at all. The great thing and I know this has often been seen, I guess, as romantic or sentimental, but the great democratizing force of the screen. And it's interesting also that in English we call what we participated in today a screening, whereas in French it's usually called a séance, which refers to the sitters, which is you participated in a sitting. The great democratizing force of a space like this and the exhibition form or an exhibition event like this is that it's the one and the same screen and the one and the same arena or sitting area that allows us to see Window Water Baby Moving and Casablanca in the space of 99 minutes. No matter if Mr. Brakhage may have dreamt of working with the Warner Brothers studio staff of 1943, or Michael Curtiz may, in his brightest or darkest dreams or nightmares, may have hoped to be the artisanal single person with a camera filmmaker that he never became. It's still that one and the same space, that one and the same plane of vision or field of vision and group of people who participate in that. So speaking about production models, budgets, questions of status, questions of habitus, the whole Bourdieu notion that is usually also part of these discussions, and rightfully so when we speak about the art world and the film world, and they should be discussed, which kinds of social habitus is involved in all these worlds. The great thing is that we can forget that, for me, because I'm trying to connect to what Louis said, that in a way you don't care or that it's different all the time. I don't care if it had a set of 1,000, if it had a budget of 100 million, or if it had a Bolex and several months of time in Florence, like Robert Beavers had when he made From the Notebook Off in 1971. They all end up on or in this great democratizer, and this is for me why, and I have not read Raymond's last book, but why the preservation or the thinking about this space not as the channel through which capitalism shoves its interests and extrudes our money, but as a potential space for many more things than that. And it's just sad that even critical people, even leftists, even the 490,000 Berlinale visitors, or let's say many of them, not all of them, follow in this thinking of the cinema as this machine of helping capitalism bubble along finely and nicely, which it doesn't necessarily have to be.
Should we open the...
Yes.
Does anybody have questions in the democratic consequence of the last statement? I think we should open the debate and...
Or remarks, for that matter.
Maybe is anyone... Do we have a microphone?
We have a microphone.
Thank you very much. I'm Csaba Monori from Hungary, writing for film.hu, online website. I have two questions. The one is that, could you tell us, please, about the people who you dedicated the different chapters of the movie to? And the second one is a bit more complicated. When you said that you rather intend your movie to be viewed by individuals than an audience, did you mean it only applying to the number of people who you approach by the movie, or did you mean that it's more intended? Do you intend that the viewer should stay alone with his experience and not experience the movie in an audience? I don't know if you understand.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good distinction.
Actually, I had to think like in the last 10 minutes about how to phrase this question.
Do you want to rephrase?
No.
Okay. All right. All right. Good.
Sorry.
It's. I don't mean for you to be alone, necessarily, either. You know, if you're having the experience with somebody that you're talking about it with, or engaging, or just watching it with, and you're having a kind of mutual experience in some kind of way, or even an oppositional experience, that's fine. You know, I'm not against audiences. Okay, I hope I made that clear by saying how gratified I was by tonight's audience and their engagement. But what I found is, through many decades, and I think this is coming out of disappointment, which is that of decades of screenings, that's what I could rely on, was looking for that would be satisfying to me as a maker. That's what I could rely on looking for and searching for, was people that it really spoke to and it mattered to. Because making work like this it's not easy when you take it out in the world. It often meets with hostility and misunderstanding and just complete disinterest and boredom. So part of that is a defensive mechanism that I've developed, to be completely honest about it. The first part of your question was about the dedications, but as things have evolved, and I guess, you know, there's a theme to what I'm talking about here. I'm trying to be in a lot of different places at once, I think, in ways. And the dedications are part of that too. That you don't know who any of these people are, I'm sure. None of them are famous. If you follow experimental film, you might know some of those names, like Ben Russell or Jonathan Schwartz or Pele Lowe, all who are magnificent experimental filmmakers. Why are individual pieces dedicated to these people? There's different reasons that have to do with my personal relationship with them. I'm not dedicating it to people that I don't know. So as a viewer, for you, what that tells you is it grounds the work in a very personal dimension of who I'm addressing that way, who I intend it for. And so it doesn't matter to me that you don't know who they are. It's more that you understand that that's partly where my work registers. And that's important to me, okay? So a lot of times I'm misunderstood with these. I know I've spoken to lots of people who tell me how sentimental and romantic I am for doing this. But I make these dedications with a great deal of thought. So for instance, the film, Jonathan Schwartz is the dedicatee of August 19th, 1966, Jupiter Sends a Message. And his films are often that brief, as that film is, and they're often about the weather in ways that have spoken to me in very deep ways. Then there's another part of our relationship. Like, he was a student of mine at one point, and I've watched him grow up, and now he's in his 40s, and he has a child, and then we have a very close friend that he worked with, who was a mentor to both of us, a great filmmaker who's passed away, Mark Lepore. And we have a relationship around Mr. Lepore by what we shared. It's like a relative that we lost. So there's all these things functioning in that dedication, and each one of them has as many things as what I just said. But it isn't important that you know. Thank you.
One last remark here.
I don't know if that's the right one for being the last, but from what I heard, you talked about, the cinematic going into art spaces obviously is one common aspect, and you talked about cinema excluding certain possibilities of the arts, and Alexander Horwath argued against that and saying cinema can be everything and have everything in it. I'm wondering whether there's also artists excluding cinema and not seeing cinema as a possibility of expression, whether you'd want to comment on that, whether artists have lost the cinema in a way.
Who are you addressing that question to? Anybody?
Yes.
Okay, good. Because I don't want to answer that.
I'm not an artist, so I cannot really answer that. But there are 95% of all artists did not even need to
with the
do
microphone
because they never had it.
I don't know. I find those terms pretty uncomfortable anyway. Filmmaker, artist, animator, blah blah blah. So ultimately, I don't think this will. You do have a very strong grammar around cinema, and I think whoever the practitioner is, the artist making film within cinema, they do subscribe to that a little bit. And I really enjoy when they butt against it, even when they have to pay their bills. Like the likes of Gus Van Sant is a good example of someone who would make something that would fit more into that kind of language, and then, sort of get budgets from studios to do stuff that he wants to do. And I think there's a number of people that have to play that game because, ultimately it is about the patronage of the arts that you have to kind of look after too. That's all I can say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we're going to go out to the bar.
Yeah.
And as you know, so I'm interested in having individual conversations. So anybody who really needs to talk to me, that's where I'll be, and I look forward to it.
We're standing out there, and we're going to move on, and everyone who wants to continue the conversation is invited to join us. I would like to thank everybody for coming here, for sharing their thoughts, for this tour d'horizon on the way images are being produced and presented and exhibited. I want to briefly announce that there will be another screening of this wonderful film for everyone who wants to recommend it. It's taking place on next Sunday at 6 p.m. And you're also invited to follow Woche der Kritik, the program of ours, best done on our Facebook site. Tomorrow is our last night with a double bill, 8888 by Isaiah Medina, and Orientierungslosigkeit ist kein Verbrechen by Marita Nea and Tatjana Turansky. Thank you all very much and have a good night.
Thank you.